Why are we having fewer kids? We're working, okay, right. Right, that's a good one. What else? Why? Cost, yes. Cost. What are children in an agrarian society? Labor. They are, to the financially oriented, assets, right? What are children to an industrial society? They are costs or liabilities. Yes, children have shifted on the great balance sheet of life from asset to liability. Now, we still love them dearly, but most of us think having a couple is probably fine. So what we see is a very predictable pattern. In fact, if you drew a graph of the percent of an economy that was agrarian and birth rates, you'd have almost a perfect correlation. We have high birth rates in agrarian societies, and as the societies become industrialized, birth rates predictably fall. So that's essentially a pattern that we expect to see continuing around. Now I'm going to show you a couple of charts which single out a particular age range, and that is people between the ages of 22 and 24, just to show you what those college grads are going to look like over the upcoming years. These are numbers now, not percents. So here's the U.S., and you can see over there in the 1960s, 1970s, this huge growth in the number of 22 to 24-year-olds represented by the boomer generation. Then you see a little dip. This is when our Xers enter in, because they're a smaller group per year. You see a bit of a rise as our Gen Ys come in, but not at huge rates. The Gen Ys basically get us back to where we were with the boomers. And then you essentially see a projected leveling off in terms of young people. So this means to the extent your hiring plans are biased toward hiring college grads, you're going to be competing in what is essentially a static pool of people. You're going to have to be very good to attract a disproportionate share of the people who will be coming out in this age group. The net is, this is a century when demographers believe the global population will level off. So when you put together the areas that are still growing and the areas that are already declining and all of the average that together, the view is that by about the middle part of this century, by about 2050, we'll see a leveling off in the global population. And by the end, maybe by 2090 or so, we'll begin to see the beginnings of the global population actually declining in size. The point is, we're at a big turning point in terms of how we view talent. We're moving from a period where the talent was growing faster than companies were growing, and companies could pick and choose, to a time when talent will probably, in most parts where you compete, be growing slower than your aspirations. So getting good at keeping talent, getting good at having the talent you have work well together, collaborate, will be a very important part of competitive strategy. One of the things that's happening and causing this particular problem is that we're shifting the nature of our economy more quickly, I would argue, than we've changed the nature of our educational system. If I were to ask you to think of a company that in your mind stands out as an icon of, let's say, the 1930s, the early 1900s, what company will you think of as the great company of that period? Who do you? Bethlehem Steel, GM, Ford. Yeah, I'd agree. Those are the companies that would come to my mind as well, and many others. They basically are companies who figured out what I would argue was the central challenge of that time. The central challenge facing companies in the early part of the 1900s was, how do I make a lot of stuff? How do I go from being a cottage industry to making assembly lines and large steel manufacturing facilities. How do I make a lot of stuff at a consistent quality and a reasonable cost? And the companies that mastered that, the ones who got really good, are the ones that we will remember in the history books as being the icons of the last century. I would also say, parenthetically, that the organizations that people created to optimize around quantity, quality, and cost were perfect for doing that. They were perfect for optimizing around quality, quantity, and cost. Because if you think about it, you would want to do things like create specialized silos. It wasn't really important that the silos talked to each other because you wanted people head down doing their specialty. You wanted a few people at the top to make the big decisions and everybody else just follow what was being asked of them, etc. So those organizations worked very well to optimize around those characteristics. But today, I would suggest those things are commodities. It's not that we don't still need quality, quantity, and cost. Of course we do. But the way of doing it is pretty well known to most companies. It's not going to make you the icon of this century. Companies who stand out in this century are going to be the ones who really figure out how to leverage or mobilize the intelligence that exists both within the workforce and in the world more broadly around them. They are going to be companies who become superb at collaboration, superb at getting ideas to share among people, at harnessing small units of knowledge and reusing them in efficient and leveraged ways, at learning. Those will be the companies that I think when our kids are asked the question, name an iconic company of the early part of this century, that they'll name. Companies who mobilized intelligence.